In this video, we are fully explaining one of the most epic love stories in anime, the one between Bon and Elaine in the 7 Deadly Sins, so make sure to stay tuned for this roller coaster ride of a relationship and the much deserved payoff in the end. If you want to see more videos like this one, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to let me know. You can also suggest another 7 Deadly Sins relationship you'd like me to cover in the comments. Make sure to like the ones that you agree with, and now without further ado, let's jump into it, spoilers and all. Elaine the fairy is like over 1,000 years old, but our love story doesn't start until relatively recently compared to her lifespan when she meets the 23-year-old Bon. Elaine was at that point the guardian of the Fountain of Youth, and Bon, remembering a story he heard from his father figure and werefox Jivago, comes to the Fairy King's forest in the hopes of drinking from the Fountain of Youth. So I like the fact that in an indirect way, right from the get-go, Bon has the father he loves, Jivago, to thank for bringing him to the love of his life. Anyways, up to that point, his life wasn't so good, so he thought that if he became immortal by drinking from the fountain, something good would eventually happen to him. A hopeful yet depressing thought at the same time. Bon keeps trying to get to the Fountain of Youth, but Elaine, who protects the fountain, keeps sending him flying away Team Rocket style. Eventually, the persistent Bon uses his 3-section staff to bring the cup to him, but before he can drink from it, Elaine uses tree branches to restrain him. Elaine explains to Bon that without the Fountain of Youth, the entire forest would wither away. Bon says he's got it. He won't try to steal it anymore. Elaine doesn't trust that a selfish human would give up so easily because she knows how evil some humans can be. Some humans even tricked fairies in the past and brutally took their wings to sell for money. However, she reads Bon's mind and realizes that he's actually telling the truth. Elaine explains to Bon that she's been watching the forest in place of her absent Fairy King brother for 700 years and nothing good happened all that time. Thus, Bon can't even be sure that something good will happen to him if he lives for eternity. Ironically though, their bonding over how much life sucks will lead to their greatest happiness, since the good thing that they were both waiting for is actually their meeting. They quickly take a liking to each other. They talk, and Elaine starts to feel sad at the thought that Bon will leave her. She says to herself, "I wish Bon didn't come here to steal the Fountain of Youth, but instead came for me." Bon is actually nearby and overhears her. He responds, "Then how about I do that?" Bon has also developed feelings for Elaine. As he explains, he doesn't get along well with other folks, and she actually took the time to listen to him. Bon promises to bring her brother back and free her from her lonely guardian duties. Then Elaine hugs Bon, only the second time we've seen him hugged by someone. However, this side story doesn't have such a happy ending. A red demon attacks the forest. Bon takes its heart out with his snatch ability and thinks he's killed it, but demons actually have multiple hearts. All he did was attract the demon's attention. Then the red demon shoots laser eyes and gives both Bon and Elaine lethal wounds. Elaine tries to give Bon the Fountain of Youth so that he can survive, but he insists that she drink it. Then Elaine seems to drink it, but then kisses Bon and in this way passes the liquid into his mouth. Definitely one of the most epic kisses in anime. Bon, with his newfound immortal powers, kills the red demon. Then Elaine dies in his arms. She died in part because he was there and attracted the red demon's attention to them, so Bon can't help but blame himself for her death. He considers it a sin that is too great to ever atone for. But still, he swears to Elaine that he will steal her away one day. It'll just be from the world of the dead rather than from the Fairy King's forest. Bon goes on to replant the Fairy King's forest elsewhere for Elaine, and the fairies start referring to this human as the new Fairy King. He occasionally comes to give his blood to the forest so that the Fountain of Youth inside it can keep the forest healthy. As the authorities usually do, they get things extremely mixed up. They blame Bon for killing Elaine in order to satisfy his own greed for immortality. Bon, who does blame himself for Elaine's death, doesn't try to clear up the misunderstanding. He now wants to be punished. He wants to feel physical pain and torture because that might take attention away from the emotional anguish he's experiencing. They try to execute Bon a total of 33 times, but they obviously never succeed because he is, well, immortal. You have to respect their persistence though. You'd think they'd give up after the second or third time. 20 years later, the main story begins, but we have to wait until chapter 21 to pick up on the Elaine and Bon stuff. After the Sins were driven out of the capital under suspicion of trying to overthrow the kingdom 10 years ago, King returned to the old location of the King's Forest and saw it was gone. He also heard that Bon the bandit was the culprit and even killed the saint who guarded it, aka his sister Elaine. At this point, Bon is curious. Not knowing King is his future brother-in-law, he asks, "How do you know about that saint girl?" And an angry King grabs him by the collar and tells him, "The saint that you killed was Elaine, my little sister." Bon could tell the truth, but again, he does feel responsible for her death. So instead of defending himself, he just plays the role of the villain, saying, I get it now. You want to kill me out of revenge. Well, too bad, I can't die. King has a workaround though. He uses his Sacred Treasure's fossilization ability to start to turn Bond into stone. He asks Bond if he has any final confessions to make, but Bond just smiles. King says, what's so funny? Don't try to act so tough. This is infuriating for you, isn't it? Bond just continues to smile though, saying to King, you really don't look anything alike. Next thing you know, Bond is a smiling statue. But then we see Elaine show up. This is possible because they're in the capital of the dead. Although King can't see Elaine, he does feel her presence. She kisses Bond and the fossilization breaks. It seems like kisses between these two always have some kind of epicness attached to them, like transferring life-saving elixirs or freeing one from an eternal statue life. Once Bond greets Elaine with a "Yo Elaine," King is quickly jealous about the fact that Bond can see her but he can't. Even Bond tells her to show herself to King, but Elaine says this place that people call the capital of the dead is where souls and memories are connected. The living and the dead must have a strong bond between them for the deceased to be seen. So even if this doesn't look good for King, it's nice to see how close Bond and Elaine are and the power of their love that can even overcome the separation between life and death, temporarily this time, but still very cool. Elaine finally asks Bond why he's here, and he says no reason. Just to tell you something. Someday, I swear I'll make you mine. Elaine blushes and lets tears of joy drop as she thanks Bond. It's honestly funny how clueless King is during this whole exchange. And I love how Bond just refuses to tell him what's going on, just letting him fill in the dots himself, and if he can't, Bond doesn't really care. After racking his brain around it on the floor, Elaine approaches King and tells him, for 700 years after you abandoned your country, I spent my life in complete and utter isolation. But he, meaning Bond, buried that loneliness in just 7 days. Ah, the epic power of love. She further explains to him that Bond provoked King into stabbing him with a spear. He's not the kind of man you think he is, she says. Suddenly, King can see her. But even that seems to be the result of her love for Bond, since she says, if you can see me, it's because I want you to understand Bond. I want you to help him. It takes a few chapters, but King finally starts getting it. He comes to the rescue, and although he doesn't say it's for Bond, he does say he came for the captain, Deanne, and for his little sister because she cares about Bond. We then see a concerned Elaine looking at the scene and thinking, please protect Bond no matter what. Eventually, the capital of the dead starts rejecting the sin since it's no place for the living. Elaine tells Bond that she was happy to see him again, and Bond smiles and says, see you around, Elaine. She also thanks her brother for protecting Bond, and so the two lovers are separated once again, but thankfully only temporarily. Fast forward, and later Bond is training with King, wanting to take back the kingdom from the Holy Knights. King is surprised that Bond cares about the kingdom, but Bond reveals that he's after the trumpet of Cernunnos. Now, I don't know if I said that right, but who cares? He says that's the least they can compensate him with after he saves the kingdom, and then he's going to use it to have the goddesses resurrect Elaine. That's his plan, at least. King is touched and smiles after learning that that's what's been on his mind, thinking to himself, I guess I can't say no to that, right, Elaine? And they continue to spar, with us knowing again that Bond's goal and priority is of course Elaine at the end of the day. If he has to save a kingdom or two in the process, so be it. Eventually Bond finds himself before the trumpet. He immediately offers his own life in exchange for Elaine's. No surprise there that Bond is ready to die for Elaine. However, they aren't interested in Bond's life. Rather, they say if he can complete a task, then they will grant the life of his beloved fairy. Bond agrees, saying he'll do whatever they want. However, then we get the craziest twist. They want him to kill his best friend and the most important person to Bond after Elaine, the 7 deadly sins dragon sin of wrath, Meliodas. You can't help but feel bad for Bond, given how torn up he must be about making this decision. But again, Elaine wins out. He goes to attack the captain and his best friend Meliodas. However, it's clear how torn up he is about it, since he tells Meliodas that he loves him, even as he's trying to kill him. While Meliodas is telling him that they don't have time for this, Bond says, you may not think so, but this is the most important thing to me right now. Finally, Bond tells him that if he kills him, the goddesses will bring Elaine back to life. And Meliodas remembers that Elaine is the name Bond often repeats in his sleep. Meliodas, being the amazing friend he is, says he gets it. He says if he was in Bond's position, he'd do the same thing. He invites him to try and kill him, even though Meliodas won't take it lying down, because he in turn has to help Elizabeth himself. Now, this might seem like an extreme thing for Bond to do, even for love, but he thinks this might be the only way Elaine can come back to life. and he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he let that chance slip. In other words, it's a doomed if you do, doomed if you don't situation. Bond explains though that a world without Elaine is no better than hell, and Meliodas tells him he understands, but he tells him to postpone it until they settle the 7 deadly sins business at hand. And finally Bond agrees and the fight is postponed. After the Sins defeat Demon Hendrickson and save the day, Bond says he's leaving the Sins. When King asks him where he's going, Bond says he's going to the Fairy King's forest. King believed it was burned down, remember, and didn't know it was replanted, so he follows Bond, wanting to find out where he's really going. They are interrupted by yet another girl who is into Bond, Jericho. Although Bond only has eyes for Elaine, so he doesn't even remember her name, thinking it's Janko first. When asked why she's following him, Jericho just blushes big time and tells him it's his fault. He should take responsibility and take her with him. All Bond knows is that he ripped her clothes off once, so suddenly he finds himself traveling with this wacky party, to use his own words. As they enter a thick fog, Jericho latches onto Bond, while Bond simply says, "Quit grabbing my arm," making it even more clear that he has no interest in her romantically. Finally, they come to the Fairy King forest, and King is overjoyed to see it, but the fairies greet Bond and not him as their Fairy King. Forget the fact that he's not even a fairy. No doubt one of the reasons Bond kept the Fairy Kingdom going was because he knew how important it was for Elaine. It was also where they met and something they shared. We also find out that Elaine's body is resting here, another reason Bond wouldn't mind coming back when he got the chance. Bond hugs the lifeless body and says, "Elaine, just you wait. I'll do whatever it takes to bring you back to life." Jericho is jealous at seeing this, thinking she's never seen Bond look the way he does while embracing Elaine's body. Bond is clearly still shaken up about what happened with Meliodas though. When the fairies say Bond's more fit to be king than King, who abandoned the kingdom to save his friends, yes, I know I said king a lot of times there, Bond asks, "If I tried to kill my one and only friend to bring one girl back to life, do I have what it takes to be king?" He literally loves Elaine so much that he'd be willing to try killing the other most important person to him for her because a trumpet said so. Not saying that's an admirable quality at all, but it definitely shows the depth of his love. Then when King starts telling Jericho to give up on Bond since he doesn't care about her, Jericho says she will just tag along after him until he starts caring about her. She says, "I've got a far better chance than some dead little fairy girl." Bond hears this though and says as if showing she's got no chance. In fact, he even strips her again for saying it. However, this backfires and just gets Jericho swearing that she'll get him to take responsibility for this. Unsurprisingly, Bond reveals that he's leaving the Sins because he's going to find a way to bring back Elaine from the dead. Jericho is determined to go with him since he saved her and she owes him her life. But obviously she also has a massive crush on him too. Gother also reveals the power of love and how it increases one's strength level. He notes that when Bond and Meliodas were fighting, love caused Meliodas to rise 430 points, and Bond's to rise 650 points. So yeah, even though we know how crazy Meliodas is for Elizabeth, it's even crazier that Bond's power level increased even more because his love for Elaine is just so strong. Before Bond leaves the Fairy King's forest, he leaves some of his blood to act like the Fountain of Youth. Bond is told that his self-sacrifice over the past many years is what returned the forest to its former glory, and Bond says, what was obvious and what I already mentioned, that there's no need to thank him since he's only doing it for Elaine. Another name I'm definitely pronouncing wrong, Gerharde, then attacks Bond, not liking that some people view him as King of Fairy Forest instead of Harlequin, and she also wants him to stay as the new Fountain of Youth for the forest. After all, if for whatever reason Bond decides to stop coming, the forest will suffer. However, when she's not having luck hitting him, she turns her aim towards Elaine's body. Yeah, that's messed up. This works and Bond sacrifices himself and is punctured by her roots so that Elaine's body wouldn't get hurt. Gerharde even tries to make it romantic, saying that he will forever be by his loved one's side. Meanwhile, King is fighting a powerful demon weapon, and before he finishes it off, he says, "I'm a greedy king. I want to protect the forest, my fairy friends, and Deanne too. All of it. This time I can save my precious sister," meaning her body, "and the one who's kept her safe this whole time. Bond, that means you too." Definitely love the dynamic between these two destined brother-in-laws. King, now that he knows the facts, has clearly done a 180 and now cares deeply about Bond and keeping him safe because of his love for his sister Elaine and her love for Bond. Bond doesn't end up returning with King though. Like he said, he's leaving the Sins. It takes us a while to see him again, but when we eventually do, he's obviously still searching for a way to bring back Elaine. He even follows false leads that lead him to the Goblin Sack shop. The owner says he doesn't have a miracle drug that can bring people back to life, since he'd sell it to some millionaire or the king of a country and retire early if he did. He did hear some rumors though about the dead coming back to life in a nearby town, and this ends up being another lead for Bond to follow, since he'll leave no stone unturned for Elaine. So him and Jericho set out to this town called the Bandit Town of Ravens. Bond calls it the lowest and worst dump. Before we get there though, we get a flashback of what happened after King saved the King's Forest from the demon weapon. Bond used his blood to heal King, and now Gerharde is thankful because he saved the Fairy King and the Great Tree. Bond grabs her angrily though and says, "I don't give a crap what you think of me or what you're trying to pull. But if you lay a hand on Elaine again, I won't hesitate to kill you," end quote. Totally understand where he's coming from, and honestly, it's impressive she didn't get off worse after what she tried to pull. She then promises that she will protect Elaine's body, and Bond warns her, "You better." And then King and Bond parted ways, with King now being recognized again as the king of the Fairy King's Forest after his courageous efforts against the demon weapon. Back to the town, which turns out to be the town that Bond grew up in as a kid. Jericho hopes they will sleep in the same bed at the inn, but Bond, ever into Elaine and not tempted, sleeps on the floor. It's funny, even the owner tells them to not be too rough on the bed since it's not in the best shape. It's here where Bond runs into his werefox father again, and we get a flashback of Jivago telling him about the Fountain of Youth in the Fairy King's Forest. Like I mentioned, I really love the fact that Jivago, one of the few people that cared about him and that Bond cared for in return, indirectly led him to meeting Elaine, the love of his life. Not surprisingly, when Jivago wonders if Jericho is his girlfriend, Bond immediately shuts the idea down, saying she's like his little sister. And of course, eventually, they get to the topic of Elaine. Bond tells his father that she died and that he wants to bring her back. When he finds out that his lover is that saint of the fairy folk, he tells his son, "Well done, you old bean." Eventually, Jivago says he's happy for Bond because he's found something he cares about more than his own self. Jivago can tell something is bothering Bond though, and then Bond tells him that he's a hopeless good-for-nothing because he weighed his lover against his friend and chose to kill his friend. He tells Bond that he has to let it all out and beg Meliodas for forgiveness. Those are his last words to his son, and then he passes on. So it's nice that he even had a chance to tell his father about Elaine too. Then we find out that the rumors about people coming back to life are actually true, and it's the result of the commandment of Faith Melascula and her powers. She has the spirits use anger and rage for strength. And then we see Elaine's body and her eyes open, letting us know that she has been resurrected too. It's clear that Elaine is not her usual self, but still, her love for Bond is clear. She attacks the other fairies because everyone else was gathered around Bond and having fun. She says it's not fair, Bond is mine. And then she brutally attacks Gerharde because she hurt Bond, which to be fair, she had that coming. Immediately, she sets out to find Bond, but when she finds that Jericho is with him, she's obviously jealous and attacks her. Bond saves her and takes the attack. Then, instead of being upset, he just stares at Elaine and they kiss. So again, this isn't pure Elaine, or natural Elaine, I guess you could say, since Melascula upped the anger and fury levels, but Elaine's feelings for Bond are very real, and that's what's adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. They take a break from kissing so that Elaine can tell Bond she missed him, and then they resume kissing passionately, while Jericho can only watch and freak out. Jericho interrupts them, and then Elaine says that she hates Jericho and sends her flying. Bond tells her to knock it off since Jericho is not their enemy, but she says she is since Jericho is trying to steal Bond from her, which to be fair, she's not wrong. She's about to end Jericho when Bond stops her. She asks why Bond is protecting her, and Bond says, "The only woman for me is you, Elaine." But Elaine's anger surfaces again. She slices him, saying, "Then why do you protect her?" She lets us know that she was watching Bond the entire time from the land of the dead. She saw all the times they spoke together and all the time they spent together while traveling. As she continues attacking Bond, she says, "I wanted to travel with you, Bond. That was my dream, and I can't allow that dream to be so easily granted to her." She calls Bond stupid for not getting it. Jericho pins Elaine down and asks her if she really loves Bond. She says, "I do love him. I love him." And then, by the way, she says, "I love him 10 more times, but I'll spare you guys that." Jericho says, "Listen up. With my height and figure, I'm a way better match for Bond compared to some flat-chested kiddo like you. Never mind the fact that she's 1,000. And I owe Bond my life. I'll do anything for him, but I would never hurt the man I love ever, and yet Bond won't have anyone but you. He threw everything away and has been wandering on foot to bring you back. So you're being controlled. So what? For claiming to love Bond so much, you would easily let someone control you to act otherwise. Elaine, with tears in her eyes, says, I know, somebody stop me, while she's attacking Jericho. Finally, Bond hugs her. He tells her again, I promised I'd steal you away someday, remember? So let's go travel together, the both of us. She cries in his arms, saying, I'm sorry, Bond. I wish you didn't have to see me so foul, but I just couldn't stop myself. Bond says he'll take any and all of her foul parts, and then she seems to faint. Then Bond is told that's the natural outcome. The way of reviving the hateful dead augments a corpse's lingering attachments and converts their anger into life force to summon them to this plane. In other words, once they deny their anger and erase their lingering attachment, then death once again awaits them. Confronted with Melascula and Galand, the commandments, Bond tells Jericho to watch Elaine for him and then tells the commandments that he's gonna kill them. He says, I don't care if you're the 10 commandments or what, but you've committed the sin of hurting my woman. Prepare to die. Bond proceeds to kick butt until Melascula goes after his soul. She tells him everyone's heart possesses something they have faith in and believe in. Whether it's a god, the sword, or a lover, it's something very precious to them. But people's hearts are weak. They lose their faith over the smallest matters. It's a vice. No matter how many people harbor distrust before me, they will burn. However, Bond passed the test. She says, even after your lover's irrational anger bore its fangs at you, you didn't doubt or hate her for a moment. Such an innocent and beautiful soul, end quote. When Melascula separates Bond's soul from him, his life flashes before his eyes, and of course Elaine is one of the people that takes up the most memories with the biggest panels reserved for her. She's the first one whose name he calls as a pure soul. Of course, Elaine cries and screams out for Bond as she assumes it's all over for his soul. However, Jivago's soul intervened, and that was the soul Galand ate. Bond returns to his body and takes Elaine and Jericho away. As Bond collapses on Elaine, unable to move, both he and Elaine beg Jericho to get the other to safety, and big props to Jericho, she lifts both of them up, even though one is her rival, and as Elaine herself points out, she's just there temporarily because of a demon curse and will inevitably die again anyways. Fast forward, and after Escanor wrecks the 2 commandments, Bond asks Elaine if she's okay, as he holds her in his arms, and she says, right now I feel so happy. Bond says, me too. She says, being held in your arms like this, Bond, feels like a dream. So even if I'm going to die again soon, I'm not afraid. With a smile on his face, Bond says, don't talk that way. And Jericho chimes in saying, it will be fine since even without anger for Jericho, her lingering attachment to life, aka to Bond, swelled up, so she'll be fine. And Elaine smiles and even tells Jericho she loves her for the first time. Eventually, Bond runs into Meliodas again and lets him know that he's been traveling with Escanor and Elaine too. Meliodas says, you got to see the girl you love again, eh? That's great. If anyone gets love, it's Meliodas. Bond apologizes for trying to kill him and Meliodas treats it like nothing happened at all. He says, let's go, old pal, for the ones we need to protect. And Bond smiles and says, right. Their issues are finally behind them, and for the time being at least, they are both able to be with the woman they love. The only problem now is they gotta find them since they've been separated. Meliodas lets Bond know that Elizabeth is on the other side of the wall, but he should go and look for Elaine. Bond says he'll do that after they collect the princess, saying don't worry about it. Elaine's being protected by both a fairy king, meaning her brother, and a holy knight he trusts, meaning Jericho. It's a nice gesture of Bond's, showing how he can help and even at times prioritize his best friend too, and it shows his trust in King, which is a nice touch. Together they attack the regenerative wall all out and manage to damage it enough to get through to Elizabeth, and soon enough they find Elaine, King, and Jericho too. Commandments Droll and Gloxinia welcome them all to the fighting festival, and here it's nice to finally have the 2 best friends and their loves all hanging out together. Everyone gets paired up for the fighting festival, and we get Meliodas and Bond together, and Elizabeth and Elaine even get matched up too, to Meliodas and Bond's shock. They of course are worried about their ladies. Bond looks very concerned with the idea of Elaine being brought into the fighting and says, shit, this ain't good. Meliodas screams, Gloxinia, leave Elizabeth out of this. Return her this instant. And Bond screams, if you so much as lay a finger on Elaine, I'll make mincemeat out of you. It's not until the girls calm them down that they accept it. Elizabeth says to Meliodas to not worry about her and to just focus on himself. And Elaine says she's fine to Bond too. She says, like Elizabeth told Meliodas, Bond should focus on his own fight. Before the fighting gets started, the two girls introduce themselves to each other, and Elaine says that she already knows Elizabeth's name because she's been keeping an eye on Bond this whole time, so that includes those around him like Meliodas and Elizabeth too. Elaine wrecks their opponents as they bond over their best friend boyfriends. For instance, one of the reasons Meliodas was here is because it looked fun. Elaine is caught off guard and smiles while saying, I can imagine Bond saying the same thing. And Elizabeth smiles, saying they're best friends after all. Elizabeth heals the opponents Elaine beat, but it's another example of how Bond and Elaine make a great couple. They're both very strong and will thus probably have very powerful children, but more on that later. Then follows one of the funniest fights in Seven Deadly Sins, where Meliodas and Bond proceed to accidentally beat their bird-like opponents, while arguing over who has the best girl. While Meliodas says, Bond, in the end, you will never know the springiness that is Elizabeth. Bond responds, whoa now. Are you looking for a fight? For your information, that's what I should be saying to you. It even gets physical, with Bond punching Meliodas and accidentally wrecking the opponent at the same time who got in the way. He elaborates, saying, I'm talking about how when I hold her, Elaine's soft smoothness can't be beat. Meliodas says, who cares? I'll have you know, Bond, Elizabeth is the best, while kicking him into an opponent. Bond says, idiot, Elaine's the best, and then he notices the opponent under him and asks, why is this guy dead? Bond further tells Meliodas that the princess is the lucky one for getting paired up with Elaine. After all, she's protected the Fairy King's forest in her stupid big brother's place for 700 years. You gotta love not only how passionate they get about this argument about best girl, but more generally, it's nice to see an anime where the main characters are already with their love interests. I feel like in most cases anime end with a confession and the lovers getting together, but I really appreciate how Seven Deadly Sins did it differently, and yet it still works great. We also get an interesting bonus story during chapter 172 that actually is supposed to be taking place when Bond, Elaine, and King were with Escanor. Bond asks what happens when wings grow for fairies like Elaine and King. It's explained that wings enable you to draw out even more magical powers. Bond looks at himself and thinks, more powerful, huh? Elaine tells him, it's alright. I don't want you to push yourself any harder than you already have for me. I love you the way you are now. The bonus story ends on a comedic note with King saying, would you quit getting all lovey-dovey at the drop of a hat? And Elaine telling him, good luck with the end yourself, brother. So it's a nice moment that shows Elaine is in love with Bond regardless of his level of power. But even more than that, it seems to be something Bond is focusing on at this point in the story. He wants to be strong and to be able to protect Elaine, but he needs Escanor's help against Galand and Melascula. And then he can only watch on powerless when Meliodas takes on Gloxinia and Droll. This frustration of his about not being strong enough to protect his loved ones is in the background of the story at this point, and thankfully it's something that will be addressed in a big and satisfying way as we move forward. After all the commandments appear together to take out Meliodas, Melascula goes after his soul. Bond hugs Elaine lovingly and she tells him he doesn't need to ask for permission. Now this is happening because he needs to go help his friend, but doing so means stopping Melascula, which means Elaine's soul that is temporarily here thanks to Melascula might be released again. He says he might lose her again, but he swears he'll bring her back to life someday, and this time permanently. And Elaine says, it's okay, Bond, save him. So here you can say he definitely redeemed himself for trying to kill Meliodas earlier to bring Elaine back, and props to Elaine for understanding what he must do and for telling him that he should do it without even asking for permission. She understands his friendship with Meliodas and how important it is to Bond, which makes them an even more perfect couple. He uses Zero Sign to sneak up on Melascula and snaps her neck. Then he appears to whip out all her hearts. However, Bond can only do so much against such powerful opponents like Estarossa. Bond tries desperately to stop him, but Estarossa is completely unfazed and continues to slowly kill Meliodas by taking out each one of his 7 hearts. Bond thinks to himself, I can't protect my woman, meaning Elaine, or my one and only friend in the world. He's crying at his powerlessness while Estarossa finishes Meliodas. Without even seeming to move, Estarossa turns Bond to shreds. He will recover because of his immortality physically, but it's still a very traumatic moment for him. And kind of random here after all that trauma, but we do get a side story dedicated to Bond and Elaine, chapter 219.5, where Jericho explains underwear to Elaine and that she should wear them. Elaine, like other fairies, didn't wear underwear, so we have a side story where Elaine and Bond go shopping for panties. There's a funny moment where Bond tells others from the changing room, if you try and peep, I'll kill you, as Elaine is trying them on. In the end, Elaine is not really into panties since they aren't breezy, they're hard to move around in, and nothing feels right. Elaine ends up getting underwear for Bond, but nothing for herself, deciding underwear aren't for her. She does think to herself that shopping with Bond was fun though. But back to the main story, and unlike Meliodas, who comes back for real because of his curse, Elaine continues to get weaker and weaker as her temporary stay among the living drags on. By chapter 223, she is bedridden, and before that, she could see Helbram and talk with him, proof that she is close to death again. As a result, Bond asks Meliodas if he can be left out of the next mission. In deep pain, he remarks that Elaine's already at her limit. He says, "That's why I at least want to be there for her final moments." Meliodas tells him that he understands. Bond says, "How could you understand what it's like to watch the woman you love die twice?" It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, since Meliodas has been through this same thing way more times with the reincarnation of Elizabeth. Not 2 times, but like 106 times. Obviously, when Bond finds out about this, which doesn't take too long, he feels terrible about what he said. Elizabeth does bring Elaine with her to save an evil-controlled Deanne with her goddess powers, and like Elizabeth says, she did it because Deanne is her precious friend. I love how all 3 of these wives-to-be get along so well together. When Melascula returns in her ultimate snake form and attacks Bond to get revenge for what he did to her, Elaine steps up. She wants to repay Bond for always protecting her, and her love for him causes her to mature and grow full wings. Her combat class rises to 21,050, and she rescues Bond from Melascula effortlessly. He thanks her and they hug as Elaine blushes. Bond tries to take Melascula's last heart but gets poisoned instead. Thankfully, Goddess Elizabeth heals him up quick. The gang works together to wreck her until Melascula is just a tiny snake trapped in a science tube. Then Bond watches powerless again as Escanor and the demonic Meliodas go at it. Escanor's the one is enough to stop Meliodas, but afterwards Bond is apart from the others. Elaine asks Bond to join the others, but again a familiar thought crosses his mind. Again he thinks to himself, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do a damn thing. Out of frustration, he crushes the part of the bridge he is resting his hand on. Elaine is a good girlfriend here and is there to comfort him. But still, this is something that's clearly bothered Bond throughout his character arc. When the going gets tough, he can't help, no matter how much he wants to and tries to. Later on, this powerlessness is emphasized again when they're trying to stop one half of the original demon Chandler. During chapter 240, Bond's brother-in-law tells him to get the captain and get away quickly. Bond says he's not leaving King alone, but King says you'd only drag me down. Got any better ideas? Oof, that's gotta burn. Not saying King is trying to be mean here, but he just threw exactly what Bond is most insecure about in his face. He can't help his friend, and he can't help his girl. It might even cross Bond's mind that King, as Elaine's brother, might not be able to entrust his sister to a husband that's so powerless, especially compared to himself. Whether King would ever think that or not, I feel like such a thought has to bother Bond because he probably feels the same way. He probably feels Elaine deserves someone who can help her and protect her properly. Bond goes to Elaine after the Chandler fight and she's bedridden again, but even if she's weak, she tries to make Bond feel better. She tells him to not worry about what happened to Gloxinia and Droll because it's what their hearts wanted. Elaine could sense that. Bond says he knows that. He smiles and looks at her, taking her hand. He says, I won't complain anymore. Right now, he says, I'm going to do everything I can for you, and she smiles back. Bond's time to shine finally comes when they learn that Hawk is a corridor between the world and purgatory, where someone must go to retrieve Meliodas' emotions from the Demon Lord himself, or Demon King depending on the translation. As Merlin explains, in purgatory, the air is a mix of both burning hot and freezing cold, while the earth is highly poisonous. Together they destroy the flesh and bone of any living thing. Time is so distorted that a single minute lasts for a year. It eats away at the souls of mortals. You lose all senses and can only rely on your sixth sense. In this land of chaos, you are hunted by the dead and the monstrous with broken souls. End quote. And if you can make it through all that, you still gotta face the Demon Lord himself at the end of it. Merlin says it's just too brutal of a foe to battle. Give it up. Bond calmly and without hesitation steps up as King and Escanor were sweating from worry. He says, I'll go. In fact, Bond begs them to let him go, saying, please let me do this. I want to save my best friend. If I can't do that, then how am I supposed to protect the girl I love? I promise I'll come back. Until then, take care of Elaine for me, he tells King. Although he's not that strong, relatively speaking, he's willing to do whatever it takes, put himself through any hell, for his best friend and for his girl. When he finally finds something only he could potentially put up with because of his immortality, the easiest thing for him to do is to step up. no matter the dangers. You gotta respect this guy. In Purgatory, Bond takes the form of a fox silhouette initially, and it's made clear that he's struggling to maintain his sanity. Even in this state though, he still finds himself thinking of Elaine. He does come back to sanity and wonders how many decades or even centuries have passed. It's made clear that Bond's body is constantly being broken down and built back up because of his immortality. He finds Meliodas' emotions in the form of a dragon he initially fights with, and then it becomes attached to him. Eventually, Bond realizes this is Meliodas, and they bond over how much they each want to see the woman who means the world to them. Bond reveals to Meliodas some of the horrors he's been through. He says, "The first 100 years, I was burned to the bone. Then I'd come back and freeze down to my bloodstream. When I came back again, I was rotted away by poison. And then I'd come back again over and over and over. But after 200 years, I got pretty used to it. Of course, burns, frostbite, and bleeding were still a daily occurrence. And after another 200 years of that, I was just sleepy." In other words, Bond's body is becoming immeasurably stronger thanks to breaking down and adapting over centuries to these harsh conditions. It's nice to know that all of that suffering does have a positive side. While talking to Meliodas, Bond says he's going to resurrect Elaine first thing when he gets back, and then drink some ale like a fish in water. Eventually, once Bond's body has completely adapted to the harsh conditions of Purgatory, Meliodas tells Bond, "You're probably the first and last person to survive in Purgatory for 1,000 years with his mind still intact." And when Bond tries to say it's just because he's immortal, Meliodas says that's not the only reason. He also says your experience of surviving Purgatory is causing dramatic changes in your body and mind. Everyone's going to be shocked when we get back to the land of the living. Bond is overjoyed and laughs at these comments, and we know why. One of those people that Bond is looking to shock the most with his newfound power is of course Elaine. He can finally laugh unreservedly because he finally doesn't have to feel powerless to help the ones he loves. The two best friends eventually get help from Hawk's older bro, Wild of all people, and find the Demon King, but it's not so easy to beat this legend. At one point, they're talking about how they lost 6,093 out of 6,093 fights in 60 years. When Meliodas starts wondering if it's better that he never makes it back, Bond is the one that talks some sense into him. He tells him, "We're getting out of here and saving our girls, I swear it." And he says this with the most determined badass look on his face. Bond tells Meliodas that he's going to break the curse on the princess, and Bond is going to bring Elaine back to life. One thing that must be noted is that the Demon Lord's powers don't let Bond just steal his strength like he does with other opponents. Instead, when Bond tries to steal it, Bond's own powers get drained instead. However, this ends up being very important to Bond. After one of the fights, Bond heals Wild's wounds. He explains that for these past 60 years, even though he's tried to steal the Demon Lord's power and strength over and over again, the Demon Lord actually ends up sucking it out of Bond instead. He says, "Thanks to that, now my body doesn't snatch but grants. So I just wanted to put it to the test," end quote. Bond immediately thinks to himself, with this power, ... But that's all we get at this point. Of course, he's probably thinking about how he can potentially grant his own life force in order to bring Elaine back for good. But more on that later. We'll get back to that. They figure out that the Demon Lord's power is actually reversal. So when Bond tries to use his new ability to give the Demon King his life force, the Demon King actually gets hurt. His new grant, aka gift ability, combined with the Demon King's reversal, makes Bond able to snatch his power like against other opponents. Unfortunately, the Demon Lord can deactivate this ability whenever he wants to, and so he does that when Bond is using Grant to intentionally restore the damage Bond caused him. Eventually though, thanks to Hawk's brother and the technique that gives him a power boost in exchange for his own life force, Meliodas and Bond are able to escape Purgatory while the Demon Lord is distracted. The Demon Lord does seem to grab Meliodas while he's en route to his body, but Meliodas finally overcomes his fear and uses his awakened true power to destroy the Demon Lord's arm and proceeds on his journey. When Bond finally comes back, King smiles and says, "Looks like my sister knew what she was doing when she chose you, Bond." And I'm sure this is exactly what Bond wants to hear. Because despite the way Bond acts with King, they mess around with each other a lot, I'm sure Bond appreciates the fact that King approves of him and sees him worthy of his sister. The big chapter we gotta talk about now is called When Someday Comes True. The cover art is a flashback of Bond from the past holding a lifeless Elaine. Post-Purgatory, Bond finds Elaine with her life still on loan thanks to Malaskiel's spell, fighting demons. She's warned that if she pushes herself any harder, she'll return to the dead. She doesn't care though and unleashes an insanely impressive attack called Tempest Cascade that captures so many in multiple giant tornadoes. Other fairies cheer her on while saying Elaine is so awesome. But Gerharde cries, knowing that Elaine is dangerously close to her limit. Elaine though is thinking of Bon and says Bon is fighting with all his life in purgatory for his friends. That's why I must fight too. As the saint of the Fairy King's forest, otherwise I wouldn't be able to face him. Beautiful how their relationship pushes both of them to be the best version of themselves. At this point, Elaine's wings disappear and Gerharde cries out. As she's about to pass, she thinks to herself, Bon, I wish we could have one last time together. At this point, as if summoned by her thoughts, post-purgatory Bon appears and kills all the demons around Elaine's falling body, with one wave of his hand, using his upgraded snatch abilities. Bon catches her and smiles. He says, sorry I'm late, and she says, Bon, you came back to me. She asks, I'm not dreaming, right? And Bon says, no. As her wings disappear, Elaine says, I guess I used too much of my strength, but I'm happy. All I wanted was to be held like this one last time. It seems like she's about to pass away right there, but with a smile on her face. However, Bon says it's not the last time. He uses his new ability, Grant. He repeats, it's nowhere near the last time. I'm going to hold you many more times. Onlookers notice that Bon's tremendous life force is going into Elaine's body. Elaine says, stop Bon, if you use up all your power from the Fountain of Youth, you won't be immortal any longer. But you see the smile on his face and you know that he doesn't care one bit. He tells a newly and permanently revived Elaine that he doesn't care about his immortality as long as he's able to keep his promise to her. They kiss as tears stream down Elaine's face. This is the big payoff we've been waiting for throughout Bon's character arc and throughout this relationship. Bon repeats what he said in the past, and I quote, someday I'll steal you away, end quote. And then he says, you're mine for the rest of our lives. We get a panel of pure bliss as the two laugh and hug, having overcome impossible obstacles like demon gods and even the separation between life and death. This chapter hits all the harder because of all those mentioned moments where Bon felt completely powerless to help. But here, he finally gets the power to bring her back, and not just that, he can use his new power-up to keep protecting her for the rest of his life. All that suffering in purgatory was well worth it, and you love to see it. After saving Elaine from death itself, Bon tells her to just wait for him a little longer, and she understands. She knows he has to go help his best friend and the others. The mangaka gives Bon very special treatment by having him appear at the big 300 chapter mark to help the others against the Demon Lord, who has now taken over Meliodas' body thanks to the commandments Meliodas absorbed. King, Mael, and everyone else was powerless against this version of the Demon Lord, but the tone completely shifts when the new Bon gets there. And Bon confidently says, I'm gonna kick this deadbeat dad out of there right now. So we've definitely come a long way from when King was telling Bon not to get involved since he'd only get in the way, and man, it's so satisfying. In fact, the next chapter is called The One Who Stands Against a God, and I can't think of a better title to hype up the new Bon. The funny thing is that King warns Bon, even if he may be immortal, he can't handle the Demon Lord on his own. Bon then breaks it to him that he's not even immortal anymore since he resurrected King's sister Elaine, using up the Fountain of Youth in the process. Yet, Bon is as confident as ever, more so even, and says, now then, time to kick this guy to the curb. The Demon Lord launches an attack that freaks out everyone. It's a high-density energy storm awash in poison, but Bon says that compared to Purgatory, it's cute. He's completely unaffected despite being in the center of the storm, to everyone's shock. King can see now just how much stronger he's become, even without his immortality. After everyone was getting wrecked before Bon's arrival, everyone is shocked to see him standing his own against the Demon Lord. Then we find out that Meliodas is confronting the Demon Lord on the inside, so that this is actually a two-way battle with Meliodas taking him on the inside and Bon battling him on the outside. Now yes, Bon had help in defeating the Demon Lord, but that's not the point. The point is that he became who he wanted to become for his girl and for his best friend, and was effectively able to help them both. In the end, Bon played the biggest role on the outside and delivered the finishing move. Afterwards, when Meliodas is beat up but back in his body, the two laugh about how wrecked their bodies are after this fight. After the Demon Lord is defeated, the gang celebrates, and during chapter 308, we see Bon and Elaine lying in bed together, both alive and no one immortal. Finally, they're just being a normal couple, and in fact, it seems like they just did you know what. It was Elaine's first time as Bon guest, and she says, I knew it, you're reading my mind, aren't you? And Bon says, then that makes two of us. He takes her in close, saying, come now, you'll catch a cold. So can we just take a moment and smash that like button to appreciate the fact that Bond was up all night in purgatory to get lucky, and he finally did. Then we get some pillow talk about Meliodas having to leave this world, since his Demon Lord power is too great for it, and the world's out of whack because of it. Elaine, like the great girlfriend she is, wonders if there's something they can do to stop him from going. Bond says though, we can't stop it. I don't want to stop it. He's seen every stupid crazy thing I ever did for you, so I want to let him go through with what he's chosen for himself. Elaine even cries because she feels for Elizabeth. She's probably thinking of how hard it would be for her if she lost Bond, and she wonders why does Elizabeth have to lose the one she loves. It's fun to then see all of these guys just hanging out as couples. The women prepare tea, the dudes piss together, with Bond adding that a real man shuts up and pisses in a group. The worrying about Meliodas and Elizabeth ends up being for nothing when she announces that she'll go to the demon world with him. And finally, when Elaine and her are talking about it, Elaine can truly smile again. Elizabeth says she's sad about losing Elaine and the rest of them, but Elaine stops her and says she understands, and she's even relieved that she chose this path. Again, Elaine will do the same thing for Bond, so she can be happy for them, thinking of how Meliodas and Elizabeth will get to be together until their final days. It's funny, when he's asked if he'd miss anything from this world, Meliodas laughs and says he'd have liked to have gotten his kid and Bond's kid to fight. And King and Deanne get jealous that he left their kid out. A hilarious exchange. When they find out that the Demon Lord actually lives and he's in Zeldris' body, yeah, this thing just keeps going, Bond goes with the others to handle Endura. At this point, Bond becomes even more powerful, if you can believe it, with the help of his sacred treasure, Kurekus. Bond kills a countless amount of Endura spawn, saving countless lives in the process with his sacred treasure. After Purgatory, he just keeps being the MVP in these big moments, and I love to see it. The gang defeats the Endura, and then goes to help Meliodas and Elizabeth with the Demon Lord. The Sins succeed in defeating the Demon Lord together, although I can't give MVP in this fight to Bond, since Escanor sacrificed his own in epic fashion to help his friends. Escanor went out in a blaze of glory, literally, but Bond was still instrumental and useful in the effort as he always wanted to be. As an added bonus, Meliodas used up Demon Lord powers and doesn't have to go back to the demon world, so Bond and Elaine and their children can still see Meliodas, Elizabeth, and their kids. Bond still likes to drink, and it's Elaine that tells him when she thinks he drank enough. Merlin does some crazy stuff, but the Sins end up helping her out anyways and saving her and Arthur from his new chaos powers. Afterwards, Bond and Elaine plan to do what they said they were going to do before, take it easy and go traveling. In fact, Elaine tells us that they're gonna go to an ale tasting trip all over Britannia. That's such a Bond thing that even King gets upset, saying that's totally Bond's hobby. Meliodas tells them that they're always going to be friends as they split up and says he's sure they'll meet again. In one of the final chapters, Elaine is pregnant and Bond and her are talking about how the baby moved. It's odd for Elaine since fairies are born from trees and flowers, but their child is growing inside of her. She asks Bond what to call the baby, and Bond smiles, so happy, and says he's already decided. Lancelot. And in the final chapter, it's nice to see Bond come with the others to help celebrate Meliodas' son Tristan's 10th birthday. We don't see Lancelot just yet though. In a bonus chapter, we're told in this country there were a human king and a fairy princess, and a prince who was born from them. Sounds familiar, right? In this story, Lancelot meets an evil human merchant who thinks Lancelot is a cute and naive girl. He tries to kidnap him, but when he makes his move, he gets wrecked because of course Bond and Elaine's son would be strong AF. He then threatens the man, saying if you come back to sell some trash, I'll kill you. And at this point, he's wearing more of a Bond expression. And I love that combo of being able to be perceived to be as innocent as Elaine, while actually being like the far from naive Bond under the surface. Of course, Lancelot snatches the man's money pouch while telling him he's not a young girl. Lancelot did visit Leonis at some point, and we're told that he changed when he came back. Now he patrols and doesn't want to play with the fairies. He reveals that it's because he's not interested in basking in the sun or picnicking for 1 or 2 days. He feels the need to protect the more naive fairies. We see him build a lance and destroy a giant boulder with it. He confronts his father, King Bond, about how he's not being serious, and because of that, stupid humans get in to trick the fairies. Bond smiles and says, as expected of my son, you helped me big time, Lancelot. Lancelot gives him a pout and walks away. Bond asks Elaine, hasn't Lancelot gotten more difficult lately? And Elaine just smiles, saying he's in that age now. Then, despite that pout, Lancelot is later shown in a great mood. literally skipping along and singing. Goes to show he probably didn't mind getting that praise from his king father, even if he wouldn't admit it to his face. Jericho serves as his master, and we see that Lancelot can read minds or hearts like his mom at this point. He runs away after Jericho also thinks about how he looks like a cute girl. Eventually, Lancelot has enough and cuts his hair short, showing off a scar on his forehead to boot. So he definitely looks less like a girl now. Elaine even comments that now he looks like Bon when she first met him. We find out that Lancelot did go to Tristan's birthday, they fought, and that's where he got his forehead scar. It's at that point they started being able to read hearts, and Bon wonders why he changed and acts more like an adult in front of him now. Elaine tells Bon that he's probably changed because he realized for the first time how much his father was respected by the people as a great knight. We also see that Gother showed him the memories of Bon too, just like he did with Tristan. Elaine says he must have felt very proud of you. He wants to become a knight like you. He wants to become someone to be recognized by you. Later, Bon smiles as he watches over Lancelot sleeping, and he says, "Don't rush becoming an adult. Stay a bit more at our side." Just like a kid Bon wanted to be praised by Jivago, Lancelot wonders if he solves the case of the disappearing human himself that came up, he might be able to get Bon's praise. Luckily, Jericho is with him. They end up passing through some kind of portal in the rain. Bon has a feeling something is wrong. He searches for Lancelot, but with no success. We're told from that day the prince and the follower were lost. The king and the queen kept mourning and searching for those two without having any results. A few years later, the prince returns as the Prince of the Lake, but that's for another story. Now that leads us to the sequel, and obviously I won't mention everything that happens to Lancelot, but since this is a Bon and Elaine video, I will go into them and their significance in the sequel. Bon was directly mentioned in the sequel series multiple times up to this point as the king of a kingdom called Benwick, where he lives with the queen Elaine. But he doesn't officially appear in the sequel until chapter 129. This chapter starts in an ominous way with Guinevere having a vision of Leonis being attacked by Arthur, and his knights Meliodas, Bon, Gother, King, and Diane are all there fighting, and at one point it looks like Bon has been severely injured and maybe even killed. At that point, Guinevere wakes up from her dream screaming, and she is sweaty and clearly upset. She says that they can't allow that future to come true, and she wonders where Lancelot is right now and what he is doing. We then get a 2-year time skip and we jump to a settlement in northern Britannia. We see a bunch of Chaos Knights telling the residents to join them in Camelot and to take their land with them. The residents refuse and they demand that the knights return the land that they already took against their wishes, including a river that was very important to them. The people try to fight back, but they stand no chance against the Knights of Camelot. It's looking very bad for these residents of northern Britannia, but Bon suddenly shows up and takes on the Knights. The Knights are shocked to see one of the legendary 7 deadly sins in a place like this in the middle of nowhere. They attempt to fight Bon, but he wrecks them all easily with his sacred treasure. Ironside asks Bon how he has been tracking the Knights, but Bon explains that it's all just a coincidence. He came to Vanya to drink their famous ale, of course, and the Knights just happen to be very close to that area. Bon is grateful that he ran into Ironside and the other Knights because up to this point, they've been working from the shadows and they've been doing their best to avoid the 7 deadly sins. Ironside explains that Arthur forbade his knights to engage the 7 deadly sins directly, but Ironside himself doesn't like that order and he thinks that he can actually take Bon. Ironside uses his high-level elemental powers to attack Bon, and for a second it seems as if Bon has been killed. The residents who are watching the fight start freaking out. But when the dust from Ironside's attack settles, it turns out that Bon is completely fine. He doesn't even have a scratch on him. Ironside is shocked and he asks Bon, "What kind of monster are you?" Bon replies that Ironside is the only monster around here, and then he leaps towards Ironside, easily breaking through his defenses. Bon says that connected by blood or not, Ironside casually tried to kill the boy he once called his son, Percival. That is not something that any human would do, only a monster. Bon goes on to say that his own son finally returned to him and Elaine 2 years ago, but he would barely look at his parents, and he just holed up alone in his room and cried by himself. Even as a child, Lancelot was so strong that he never cried, but now he kept crying about how he failed to protect his dear friend Percival. For those of you who need a reminder, right before the 2-year time skip, Percival had seemingly died. His magic disappeared completely and he was basically comatose and refusing to wake up, which absolutely devastated all of his friends, including Lancelot. Furious, Bon kicks Ironside right in the gut with a clear message. Here's one from him to you. At that point, the Knights of Camelot retreat in a panic as Bon opens a bottle of ale and starts downing it. Then he says, "Why don't I go drink with the gang for a change?" implying that he is finally going to meet up with the other 7 deadly sins again. That is all we've gotten from Bon in the sequel so far, but as mentioned, we also learned that for the 6 years that Lancelot was missing following the events of chapter 346.5, Bon and Elaine continued to search for him and Jericho relentlessly. Even after Lancelot thankfully returned, they still wanted him to try to find Jericho and to bring her back to Benwick, but again, let's never talk about why Jericho didn't return and decided to join King Arthur again. Never. And that is it for this behemoth of a video about Bon and Elaine's relationship. Such an epic romance where Bon had to save her from death itself and became the person he finally wanted to be in the process, a person who could protect his loved ones. They get their happily ever after, Bon stays loving his ale, and they have an incredibly powerful son to boot. There may be more footnotes to add as the sequel continues about these two, but it's clear that Bon and Elaine's romance is perfect and complete in its own right. Now, these long videos take so much time and resources, so if you enjoyed them and want to keep them coming, the best thing you can do is smash that like button. Let me know in the comments that you want more, and subscribe so you don't miss future videos like this one. Let me know what 7 Deadly Sins couple you want to see covered next, and like suggestions you agree with in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, you won't want to miss my Every Sins Backstory Explained video, link on screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.